Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Nexa front lawn. We are about to start the next session, but just quickly, a little bit of housekeeping. Please put your phones on silent, and if you need to take an urgent call, we'll ask that you leave the venue in order to do that so you don't interrupt the session. No flash photography is permitted. If you need any medical assistance, the first aid tent is at the archway at the entrance to Diggy Palace. And also, we'd like to note that the Jaipur Literature Festival has been designated a safe space for everybody present. And so we certainly hope that there are no problems with any issues of harassment during the festival. But if any incident should arise, there is actually a police desk, again, at the entrance to Diggy Palace, where the police can be reported to, should that be necessary, which of course we hope it isn't. So the next session, much awaited, is Beyond the Female Eunuch. This is part of the Women Uninterrupted series. And the guest speaker today is Germaine Greer, a writer, academic, and critic who is widely regarded as one of the most significant feminist voices of our time. Her first book, The Female Eunuch, was published in 1969 and remains one of the most influential texts of the feminist movement. Greer has a distinguished academic career in Britain and the USA. She makes regular appearances in print and other media as a broadcaster, journalist, columnist, and reviewer. Germaine Greer will be interviewed today by B. Rowlatt, who began her career in the BBC World Service and has written for national and international media. Her book, In Search of Mary, was voted Biography of the Year by the Independent newspaper, and she chairs the Mary Wollstonecraft campaign. Please join me in welcoming very warmly to the stage for part of the Women Uninterrupted series, Beyond the Female Eunuch, with Germaine Greer and B. Rowlatt.
Tech is the answer. I think we're in business now. Can you hear me now? No. I'm going to have to... Oh. Now you can hear me. I'm so excited, I can hardly sit down. It's not often I get to introduce a genuine legend. But this person has been a tornado of ideas, of provocation, for more years than many of us have been alive. She's divisive, she's provocative, she's brilliant. Is she even human? We're about to find out. She has been variously described as the goddess Greer and Germaine Bloody Greer. That's all right. Please give a huge Jaipur welcome to Professor Germaine Greer. Thank you for being here. So this session is called Beyond the Female Eunuch, but obviously we have to start with the Female Eunuch. Tell us why that book was so necessary at that time.
In some ways, I'd almost rather answer the question as to why it's still in print and why schoolgirls have still got to read it. That was not the idea. I thought that it would be replaced by dozens. What old-fashioned technology, really, isn't it? And why is it this shape? Have you ever wondered?
Oh, already?
I mean, what is the point these people are trying to make? It doesn't have to be that shape at all. Just give it 1 second's thought. But anyway, so that's a worrying question to me. The fact that the book still has a readership and still appears to be germane, to use an unfamiliar English word, meaning of the same seed as. Why did I think I had to write it? Well, it's funny, because the story begins with someone called Sunny Mehta, who is now the chief of Random House. And Sunny and I were at university together at Cambridge, and he asked me one day to lunch at a Chinese restaurant in Soho, where he asked me what I thought he should publish. He was working as a young director at Paladin, which was an imprint of Granada. And I ran through a few modish names that we knew at university. And then Sunny said, but what do you think about the fact that it's the 50th anniversary of women getting the vote? Now, this is something that always pisses me off, because I'm Australian, and we gave the vote to all women in 1903. But you're used to the British taking credit for other people's work, so that won't surprise you in the least. Nor does it surprise me. However, I said, oh, for crying out loud, they gave women the vote when it was already a busted flush. There were no policies that women could vote for, and they left it way too late, and it was the product of a disgraceful bargain between British feminists and the war effort. That the women agreed that they would not campaign against the war or for female suffrage, that they would support the war, a war that should never have been fought. And they have spent this year carrying on about their wonderful contribution to the world in giving some women over 30 who had property, something that's familiar from voting patterns in India again, women over 30 who had property could have the vote. This is what came out of their rotten deal. And as I gnashed my teeth and let my food get cold, Sunny, and those of you who know him might know that Sunny doesn't waste words ever. Sunny just sat there and then said, that's the book I want. And I thought, my God, can I actually write a book like this? So I went home and I tried. And I write enormous chapters that no one would read in a fit, including Sunny, who's very good at not reading books that he knows he's not going to sell. Anyway, eventually, I was actually in the loo when I had the idea that women have very little time. They are generally doing 3 jobs at once, and the only time they have to read anything, really, is when they're in the loo. So the book is divided into loo-length chapters. That's what they are. So you can just get them done and then get on with whatever it is you've been trying to do. So then Sunny did read it, because he is a gifted publisher, and those of you who know him will know this is the case. He has since been credited with inventing the main idea of the female eunuch, and that is absolutely not the case. The person who's responsible for that is a black radical from America called Eldridge Cleaver. And it's based on an essay in his collection called Soul on Ice, and that's the allegory of the black eunuchs. And in that he explains that the image of the super virile black man is actually the result of mental castration, that he sees his women being dominated by white men, by a white society, by white values. He is already marginalized in his own culture, and he becomes dangerous. He becomes reactionary, and in the case of Eldridge Cleaver, he becomes a rapist. And that's how Cleaver ended up in jail, writing Soul on Ice in the first place. So I was thinking about this idea of spiritual castration. I am born with energy, with élan vital. I'm born with creativity. I'm born with a voice. A girl child can cry as loud as a boy child. How does she become silent? How do you drive her voice back into her throat? And what do you do to her when you do this thing? You create something that is profoundly, in my view, profoundly dangerous in its implications. You cannot render half of the population incapable of independent thought or action.
Do you mind if I jump in briefly?
Carry on.
I wanted also to share your summary of the book last year, which goes, "Don't take it up the arse if you don't want to take it up the arse." That's the Twitter version, if you like, of the Female Eunuch. But it contains the line, the famous line, "Women have very little idea how much men hate them." Some readers have observed that there's also a fair amount of almost scorn for women also. You know, you definitely challenge women's responses to violence and so forth.
Well, I hope so. But the statement that women have very little idea how much men hate them is not a way of saying that men hate, or all men hate all women all the time. It's a different statement. It says you don't know when you're in danger from the man you're with. We think we want Mr. Right, but in fact we are terribly attracted to Mr. Wrong. Hence, if this were not the case, 50 Shades of Grey would not be a bestseller. And 50 Shades of Grey is not, it's even badly written. Everything about it is dreary. And there they are hunting for the horny bit, when there's clearly no horny bit. It's a horn-free zone, if you ask me.
I'd like to spend some time in another one of your great works, Slipshod Sibyls, which I really find quite difficult to say, that might just be me, which is, for me, a very counterintuitive read. Germaine is, of course, a professor of English literature, and the work in this is an assessment of the women poets and writers of the 17th and 18th century. And I've always been drawn to those writers in the way that you characterize as misplaced in terms of rebalancing of the canon. So for people who seek to give those women a voice and a place in the canon of literature, you describe this process as more likely to find heroines than poets.
Well,
I was kind of disappointed. I mean, I
by all means be disappointed.
The intention to rediscover or to lift up or to reclaim our women writers, for me, seems a very worthwhile one.
Well, it's arguable that I've done that. I mean, there is a book that we haven't mentioned called Kissing the Rod. Everybody got upset about that name, Kissing the Rod, but it's quotation from the Bible, and it means that a whipped child, and I think you'll find the same thing in Sanskrit, a whipped child should kiss the rod with which it was whipped to show that it accepts the lesson that it has been given. But of course it means something else as well. And I was very aware of the fact that it was a pun. By the way, these days you'll be taught all sorts of things are puns when they're not. Just resist, but that is one. And in there, we took all the women poets of the 17th century, even the most obscure. We hunted them down, we found if there were any manuscripts, there usually weren't, and we reproduced them, and we are still, those texts are still in use, and that collection is still in use, and that's a major collection that we did. I also published the unpublished works of Afraban, published the surviving works of Anne Wharton, and I have an edition of Anne Finch, Countess of Winchelsea, which is ready to roll when I can find someone, and I think that someone is here, who can help me design a template for scholarly publishing on the internet. So you can mine it down as far as you want to go, and you can make connections across classes and genres and modes. I can't understand why it hasn't been done, why so much of the internet publishing is really second rate.
If it can happen, it can surely happen here. Job opportunities.
I reckon. Oops. What's wrong with you?
But I was fascinated in that book by the figure of Letitia Landon, who you explored at length, you know, another lost voice to history. And that led me on a trail of thinking about women writers and how prone they seem to be to suicide. What do you make of that?
Well, you've got to think of who the women were. The first thing that happens to a woman who publishes is that she becomes public. That means that she is a prostitute. That's what that actually means in terms of its...
How does it mean that?
Because her private thoughts are being displayed to a promiscuous audience of anyone who feels like investigating them. But also, just about every bookseller would sell his woman writer on the grounds of her sex. They were all young, they were all beautiful, according to the people who merchandised them. And so what was being sold was the woman herself rather than the work. And the work hardly ever warranted really serious attention. It was mostly very fashionable, and it was saleable, it was commercial. Now, when we look at aristocratic poets, for example, even that imputation of being commercial would destroy them. So they dissociated themselves from their work. It was essential to their dignity as gentlemen. But the women couldn't do that. They were chained to their publishers. And very often the relationship was worse than that. It was housekeeper, bedmate, oh, and by the way, provider of copy. It's a bit like being, I remember saying when I first met a relative of the patron of this festival, I said, her name was Lady somebody or other, and I said, is she a lady or an actress? And in fact, being an actress and being a prostitute were practically inseparable in the 17th century. Things begin to change in the 18th when you have the great tragedians appearing. But I think the important thing to realize is that we don't have to pretend that they're great. I don't care about them being great. I care about the voice being their own voice. And then even its illiteracies, even its crazy spelling, even the agony of a woman who's buried all her children. This is our history.
But it's the very process of that voice emerging that it then in turn is their destruction by its process.
Yes, I think in the case, I'm not sure that Aphra Behn did not kill herself. She was crippled by arthritis, possibly complicated by syphilis. They're closely related in terms of their biochemistry. I'm not sure in her case. We know about Sylvia Plath, but there are many, many more.
Oh, Virginia Woolf. I mean, Wollstonecraft attempted suicide. There are so many that I wonder what the sort of unifying theory can be.
Well, in some ways, these women were forced to cannibalize themselves. They had to tell their own story.
And do you think that's something that male writers weren't susceptible to?
We haven't got time for a history of English literature, but we have a generation of women appearing in the 18th century who have to go to work in order to feed their children because their husbands have abandoned them or been killed or whatever. And then you get the emergence of the lady novelist. And then you get the emergence of the virtuous lady novelist. By the way, you mentioned Letitia Elizabeth Landon. I have to make a confession here that in Slipshod Sibyls, I didn't know that Letitia Elizabeth Landon had borne 2 illegitimate children to William Jerdan, her publisher. Yes. Bastard. Jerdan, never mind. She'd borne 2 children to him. These children were shipped off to Australia. Where else? So that they could be lost without trace. That is so sad that her life was such a lie because she was everybody's darling and lies were told ad infinitum. That's not my scholarship.
It's almost a foreshadowing of the treatment of women in public life today, the way in which she's trawled over and picked over and libelled. It's really quite shocking, the treatment that she was subject to.
Yes, but she was lying a blue streak from beginning to end. And there were a number of very gifted men, artists, who were in love with her. I mean, she was sort of a child woman. She was kind of, Shirley Temple before her time. And embonpoint, little bosomy, tiny waist and all of that. And she used to sit on Jerdan's knee at dinner parties and banquets. Shocking behavior. What was that about?
I want to move the conversation into the events of last year, the political events of last year, and some of the comments that you've made on them that have generated a lot of heat, in particular around the movement of Me Too, which has had quite serious and dynamic manifestation here in India. And your comments around rape, which people might remember you described as bad sex in some instances. You described the Me Too movement as whining. I mean, do you see how the outrage that these comments caused might have a particular resonance here in India?
Do you know, it's become an extraordinary thing that since the case of Nirbhaya, the case of Jyoti Singh, England has become convinced that India is the rape capital of the world. And I've had to say that there are 1 billion people in India, that we can, in India, you can produce an example of almost any distortion of human behavior. You'll find one somewhere, because all life is here. Now, before you start making that judgment about India, have a look at
I'm not making that judgment, by the way.
But hang on about what happens in England. We've had, for years now, generations, we've had the case of Rotherham, where hundreds of young women were systematically abused, broken into the use of drugs and alcohol, and prostituted amongst all kinds of comers. It's been investigated twice. We've now ended up with a handful of arrests. But the really significant thing is that the British media have completely forgotten it. Whereas in India, what actually happened to Nirbhaya is remembered every day. That in India, people give themselves no peace about that. Now, one of the weird things there is that is always referred to as a rape case. Rape was the least of it. The worst thing about was the brutality of the way she was killed. It's not a rape case, that's a murder case. Now, rape is a question of non-consensual sex. That's all it is. It doesn't have to draw blood. It can be done by the man you love most in the world. And it's probably worse for you when he's the one who doesn't care whether you really want him and whether you're enjoying what he's doing or not. Rape is diurnal. It is in every street in the country, every high-rise. It's an aspect of our degraded sexual relations and our failure to respect each other. But when you eviscerate a young woman, when you pull her entrails out with a starting handle, you have to call it a different name. The penis is not my enemy. In fact, it's the only part of a man I know what to do with. And if the penis was all he had, I need never be afraid of him. But I'm more afraid of his thumb, which can pull my eye out. I'm more afraid of his elbow. I'm more afraid of his cruel tongue that can say things to me that stay stuck in my head and really degrade my feelings of worth and honor. That's really my argument about rape. We keep sexualizing crimes of violence. What is important about them is not that they're sexual, it's that they're violent.
But I want to push you on the description of Me Too as whining, because certainly here in India, my friends that have been active in the movement describe it as not just a change in conversation around sexual harassment, but a start in the conversation around sexual harassment. And for them, it's been a huge and very important movement. I just think whining is such a loaded way of describing it. That's really, you know...
Yeah, but as a matter of fact, I don't think I ever used that word. That comes from a peculiar conversation I had with someone at the Australian High Commission who did not let on that he was a journalist until he had finished grilling me about all sorts of things. I've never called it whining. I have other reservations about it, though. You know, I figure that if a man makes a pass at you and you reject him, or you might even decide not to reject him, especially if he's offered you a part in a movie, but then it turns out that he only wants to masturbate in front of you, which is kind of sad. I mean, you could feel terribly sorry for him, and he's really unattractive, don't you think? But anyway, so there you are in that situation. And then he's nervous that you're going to go and talk to the press. And so his lawyers come in and they say, we want you to sign a non-disclosure agreement. And you sign the non-disclosure agreement, you get paid a 6-figure, 7-figure sum, that you spend the money, and then you think, yeah, I think I'll tell my story now. And I'll tell you something else. In court, it's going to go nowhere. Watch this space. What they've got out of it is billions of dollars worth of free publicity. But they will probably...
Who gets free publicity?
Oh, Rose McGowan. Who want me to name them all? There are a lot of them.
I didn't understand which party was sort of benefiting.
The ones who get the NDAs. I mean, I've never been offered one. I bet you haven't been offered one either.
No, but the night is young.
Yeah, but also, if you actually have debts and you have children and you're trying to live in America and you're not very successful as an actress and blah, blah, blah.
I can't help thinking that's a very jaded view of a movement that, you know, and friends of mine have, you know, many people hold you quite rightly up as an icon, feel a little bit, well, maybe more than a little bit, feel betrayed. They think that you have been a voice for the powerless and that you are now a voice for the powerful with that kind of statement.
Don't think that for one moment. The real problem here with Me Too in America, I'm not sure what's going on in India, how that plays out. But if you're talking about what's going on in America, what you're going to end up with is, first of all, a criminal prosecution, which I think will probably fail. And it will fail on the consent rule, which is outrageous, but you can't replace it. If you replace it, this is tedious to anyone who's not doing law, but if you take away the issue of whether a man believes that a woman consents, you take away the thing known to lawyers as the mens rea, the knowledge that he's committing an offence. Therefore, you cannot convict him. So you've tied both hands behind your back. But the other thing to do with the Harvey Weinstein situation, which is really what we're talking about, is that the police who are now bringing the criminal charges have had to use 2 women who are unknown to the public. That is, 2 women not associated with Me Too, because if they were, the case would fail. What they haven't done is thought this through. But we've been told lies as well. We've been told that they had raised money for civil cases against Weinstein or whoever, and they haven't brought the civil cases. Because
it seems in more countries than one that there's almost a sense that the legal system, the judicial system is scrambling to keep up with the events as they unfold on social media.
Well, the thing about that is that we're very well aware that the body of law regarding sexual assault is a mess. We don't even describe the same actions, we don't use the same words, and so you have something called the Istanbul Convention, which was an attempt to rationalize the law of rape, most of which is descended from the British Penal Code in India, for example. So you have a mix-up between what is the traditional approach, which is one, that you don't reveal the name of the victim, that anyone who does is guilty of an offense, and so forth and so on. And then coming up with marriage of reparation, which in traditional practice is considered to be a way out of an intractable problem, and which is being very rightly opposed bitterly by Indian feminists. Now, to me, this is a much more worthwhile fight. I'm not really, what's going on in Hollywood or in the law cases in New York is going to cost millions. And women
there will be law cases here too. I mean, I wasn't actually referring
but women who are undergoing systematic sexual abuse within relationships are still unrepresented. There is nothing that they can do that is not going to impact worse on them than it is on the people who've abused them.
I'd like to leap nimbly into another minefield, which is the trans movement. You're on record, I know, oh God, you're on record as saying you can't cut your dick off and be a woman, which was met with very huge opposition. Following that clash, I just wondered how you're on record since, you know, the 70s as being very clear on what is a woman and what is gender and what is sex. So it's almost as if the public debate is finally kind of catching up to that. But I just wondered how you respond to the fact that in India, you know, on government forms, there are 3 gender choices, and how does that sit with your understanding?
I'm delighted with that question.
Thank you.
Because it gets close to where I'm really coming from. It is to me extraordinary, but not ultimately surprising, that India was able to do this, and that Hinduism was able to carry this clear truth that there are males, there are females, and there are others. And the others are the people we sometimes call intersexuals. There are people who have ambiguous chromosomal status, and it is wonderful that they are now able to be themselves. But this is a very special destiny. But the fact that you have always had before your eyes the image of the hijra, of the person who is an image of the Godhead that contains both sexes, that can bless a wedding, and so on. There can also be a damn nuisance. It can be a frightening figure that makes you hustle them out of your shop because your clients are leaving, and they know that perfectly well. These are games we have played for a long time. They are serious, they are painful. But you know, the thing is this: if you're going to accept intersexuality as a special destiny, you don't get rid of it. You don't run along to a doctor and say, turn me into the thing I'm not. I want to be at the other end of the spectrum. Here I have to be a man, I want to be a woman. And if I'm not a man, I must be a woman, because there's nothing in the middle. The fact is, we are all in the middle. And I find it so interesting when somebody says, oh, you know, when I was 20, I discovered I was bisexual. You think, what took you so long? We are all bisexual. We all hope that we can make love with our same sex one day. We generally do it when we're in about fifth form, and it generally ends in tears. But we know that there are other forms of sexual pleasure, and there are certainly other forms of passion. And there is also the importance of friendship. But it's when you decide that you need to be turned by surgery and hormones and lifelong medical treatment into the thing you are not, that you're being persuaded to make a mistake that will cost you. It sounds like a ticket to happiness. But those of us who are born women could tell. Of course, I'm not surprised that men are better at being women than we are. They invented the whole pattern for a start. And here we've got men who don't menstruate. There's got to be a plus. I mean, women who don't menstruate. There's got to be a plus, doesn't it? Who don't have to worry about getting pregnant. Remember all that? These are obviously going to be special, glamorous entities, and they've all been presented this way. Whereas the really fascinating thing about the child born with ambiguous genitalia, and this is something that was never in the news in England, is that the EU brought in a legislation that it was illegal to decide what sex a baby was if the question was moot, until the baby was old enough to make a choice. Now, Britain ignored that rule completely, as far as I know. But I think it's fair. It's fair that you understand that these are highly conflicted decisions that you come to. And hair extensions and eyelashes and fake breasts and all the rest of it, we've got women assuming them at the same rate as men are, or faster. These are vexed questions, but to me, it is shocking to consider that the commonest intervention with a newborn little girl is to request the reduction of the size of her clitoris because it's taken as big enough to suggest intersexuality. This kind of behavior has got to stop.
It's clearly absolutely clear in your mind that, you know, what the delineation of a woman is and where you sit on the gender and sex debate. I wonder, is it possible to hold two positions, to accept those as facts, but also to see that the trans population and trans activists are a small and very vulnerable minority? And your remarks have not helped that community. There's no reason not to help or be kind.
I don't know why I'm forever being asked to talk about this subject, because it doesn't actually interest me. It's not what I write about, but it's what I'm made to talk about. And every time I'm probably exaggerating a bit here, but most times when I speak publicly in England, we have a threat that it will be disrupted and so on. Do you know, the interesting thing to me is that every time that we've had all of this and we've had the venues spending more money on security and so on, they don't show up. And it's something that women are familiar with, which is threatening behavior from men. And what it is menace. It's just a threat. And so you have to say, do your damnedest, I'm here. And they don't show up. You have to ask them why they don't show up. See, I don't even know who they are. And they're not my subject.
We'll move on from this one. I want to move into your work with the environment. And I noticed just before we came on stage, Germaine was naming all of the trees around here very impressively.
I did not.
You did.
I didn't.
We argued about a neem tree, which wasn't a neem tree after all. You have bought, with your, I imagine, extraordinary wealth, an area of forest in Australia, and you've worked to regenerate it. Can you tell us more about that project?
Well, I wrote a whole book about it called White Beech. White Beech is a tree called Camelina leichhartii, and it belongs in the Lamiaceae, which is the family of the nettles. And it was the most valuable form of timber tree growing in the southeast corner of Queensland at the time of white contact. And within a generation or two, it was logged out, it was gone. And so one of the things I've been doing is bringing it back again, learning how to propagate it, and running what we call a rehabilitation project in which the forest helps itself. All we have to do is remove weeds. We then have to control more weed growth in the first 2 years after planting. And then by that time, the little trees can manage by themselves. As soon as they've grown up to make shade, the weeds all disappear because they're mostly imported weeds. Similarity with India, again, by the same people. And so this is what we've been doing.
And why do you bother? Do you enjoy it immensely yourself, or is there a different motive?
I think it's a very typical female motive. I just wanted to fix something. I was sick of everything being buggered everywhere I looked. And I thought, if I can just arrive at a thing that I can make good, but I don't think that I'm doing it. The forest is doing it. I'm just a facilitator. It's taken all my money. And if I give my land away now to a local charity, it will have to pay 10% tax, GST and capital gains tax. Even though I've given it away, the Australian government will assess it as if it had been a cash transaction. If you've ever, I mean, this is the sort of unreasonable thing that happens in India, but they generally call it corruption. In Australia, it's not given any name at all.
But taxation aside, you derive a sense of optimism from that undertaking.
Yes, sort of. I talked about it the other day to a group who were interested in rewilding. Oh, yeah. And I said, you know, at the end of 30 years of hard work, I'm not sure if biodiversity on this land has improved. I rather think it hasn't. There were more insects when I came to it in altogether 2001. So I've got my sums wrong as usual. There were definitely more insects, most of which had never been described, never unknown to science, and now they never will be known to science because they're gone. And if I think about my wild animals, I think my pythons are beautiful big 5-meter pythons, and they have something called body inclusion disorder, which is an autoimmune problem, and I think they are disappearing, which I can't bear. They are just amazing animals, and I know them in the wild. I know how they mate and what sort of social behavior they have, and before I could record it.
So you spent a huge amount of time in this forest.
4 months a year, probably.
Okay, and do you just go in and wander around?
No, I don't do that. I collect seed, I sow seed, I pot it up and pot it out, and and I have to tidy up the hard stand.
If this is a bit of an odd question, but when you die, would you like to be scattered amongst the... Would you like to become part of that forest?
I don't care.
You're not bothered what happens?
No. Do whatever you like with me. Put me down the waste disposal unit. I'm not bothered. I know that I'm going to join the whole thing once more once I'm gone. You know, you've discovered I don't believe in God. Oh. Oh, dear. Lots of disappointed people. I'm sorry.
I think it's time to come to questions because I think we're going to have lots of them. So if you want to raise your hand, and people will be moving in with microphones. And in the meantime, I'm just going to take this opportunity. Do you know any good jokes, Germaine? Let's fill a bit of airtime. Would you like me to tell you one?
Yes, please.
How many feminists does it take to change a light bulb?
If it's left to the feminists, we soon won't have any light bulbs.
No! How can you say that?
What
no
we'll have,
feminists, because you don't need light bulbs when there's a glass ceiling.
But there's not...
She liked it.
There's not a glass ceiling. Priyanka is joining the Congress Party. And everyone's saying Indira is come again.
So I'm looking for waving eager people.
I hope not.
And we have a question. Yes, stripy t-shirt. Hello.
Hi. So I just wanted to ask, because you said that you wish your book had been replaced by now. Is there anything about the Female Eunuch that you would change now? Something about it that you'd said back then that you might have a different opinion on now?
I don't really think there is. I mean, it's important to realize that books are of their time. They don't last forever. And there are things that are dated, but I'm much more depressed when I'm being told by people that it seems as if it's all the way I described it. That, you know, our young women are desperate to be in a relationship. They're desperate to be, you know, have long hair and long legs and big round tits. And they're already worrying to a point that is heartbreaking, whereas what they should really be doing is building themselves a life and a work that they really want to do. And if they're really unlucky, they will fall in love. And that's when the trouble starts.
There's a question here at the front. Hi.
Sorry. Your views are very bold and you're often very unfiltered about what you have to say. So does that land you into trouble with people, the media?
When you ask a question like that, you sound like an Australian. Not in your voice, but in the sentiment. When I go to Australia, which I do twice a year, and if I have to do some media chore, they always say things like, you realise you've been criticised. And I have to say, I've been a teacher all my life. My job is to get criticised. I don't want you to agree with me. I want you to consider what I'm saying. And if you want to reject it, reject it. Otherwise, we'll never make any progress at all.
I think it's quicker to ask, when is she not in trouble? Do you enjoy the trouble? Do you enjoy kicking the hornet's nest?
Oh, look, I don't even read the paper. And I don't have a mobile phone. And I don't have a Facebook account. I have no idea what venomous rubbish is in that vomitorium.
Very sensible too. We have a question here. Scarf.
Yes, thank you for your very interesting and controversial opinion. A few years ago, if I remember correctly, please correct me, you said about Indian society that the traditional relationship and even arranged marriage and abstinence and so on were a good thing. Have you revised your views, or am I not representing the views properly? Thank you.
I can't imagine why I would ever say that. I think it probably is a version of something I might have said. I notice now that Indian government is becoming concerned to make it possible for love marriage not to be impeded by parents and interested parties. And I'm thinking, well, hang on a minute. Is the durability of such a marriage greater or less than when it's families that marry and people who are within the surroundings of the family. Now, one of the first things I did after I wrote The Female Eunuch is I came to India. Now, why did I do that? I wanted to see if in India women were allowed to grow old. They could become senior. They could become more influential members of the family group. And it seemed to me obvious that a mother-in-law who made her bahus, her daughters-in-law, unhappy would be a failure at building an extended family. And that an extended family is an interesting ideal in itself, and it demands a lot of all its members. And it helps in cases of hardship to preserve the family, to keep it together, to keep it from fissioning. But in fact, the pressures on the Indian family have now become almost lethal, I think, because of outwork, because so many members of the family have to go away, have to work elsewhere. And so you're watching what was once a cruel system, but a successful system, now falling into decrepitude and wondering what the future holds. But on the other hand, people in England will say to me that I, feminist, destroyed the family. And I say, you do me too much credit. The family destroyed itself. And now we have to look at
how did it destroy itself?
In all kinds of ways. I mean, one is that you expect too much from that one person. My best friend, my lover, the best sex I've ever had, and da-da-da-da. And then he turns out to be a disappointment. Well, he's human. That's the thing about him. I mean, you might marry God in a dream, but you can't marry him in reality. I seem to be remembering a Shah Rukh Khan movie when I tell you that. Anyway, so I think women are walking out of marriage in the West. And to me, that's amazing. When you decide, I'm not staying in this relationship because I have no self-esteem, because I have no confidence in myself, because I'm dying, I really need freedom. That's the word. But freedom is hard. Freedom hurts. You're in free fall. And I see women, I talk to groups of women of all sizes all the time, and I see these women who have taken the hard road. They've gone from a family with 2 incomes to trying to be a single parent. And there's a precipitous fall in the standard of living, in their expectations. They can never take a holiday. They can hardly ever afford to buy any clothes or spend any money on themselves. And yet it's freedom. It's strenuous. But they are different. They are stronger. And they are going to make that freedom count. But before it does count, everything has to be made new. The legal system, property ownership, income, and the sharing of income. We should not have a single child dying of hunger in this rich world. Now, you saw the statistics this week for children critically undernourished in India. And you saw the strange thing that Kerala, not the richest state by a mile, Kerala having the best result. How did they get it? Well, heaven forbid that I should preach communism in these hallowed halls. But it looks like, from some points of view, it's a good idea. But it changes everything. It changes human relationships. It changes the claims people make on each other. If the female eunuch has done anything, and it just nudged open that door, just a little bit. But women are escaping through the crack. And when you notice them again, they will be different. They will be older, they will be stronger, they will be calmer, and they will be sure of who they are. I deal with them every day, and I'm stunned at the change in them. You see, the female eunuch didn't make the women. It was the women who made the female eunuch. It's not a very good book. It's the best book I could write at the time. But it was the way they read it that made it important. But now it's time for you to write your books. Men and women and intersexuals. Please, let's have a substitute. Let's get rid of it. Let's chuck it out, the female eunuch. It's past its time.
There are lots more questions mushrooming up. There's a woman here with your hand raised. Yes, you. Hi, yeah, you.
Where?
Yes.
Oh, heavens.
Hi, so I wanted to ask you what your views about intersectional feminism are, since feminism is largely pushing its boundaries with every movement coming in. For example, you have a lot of LGBTQIA activists joining hands with feminists. So do you see the movement as still being limited to just women? Since we had the conversation about trans people, for example, when you say that you're a feminist, you're someone who understands gender, not just the women in terms of gender. That's what I'm trying to ask. So what do you think about intersectional feminism?
I don't know, because I never really understood what it was. I mean, I have a difficulty, which is that I can't speak on behalf of groups to which I don't belong. I'm 80 next birthday. Most people wouldn't listen to anything I said, and that includes the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker. I'm considered to be functionally idiotic by now, and anything I say is thought of as it was some form of automatic speech that I just occasionally... Somebody even has asked me in an online questionnaire whether I thought it wasn't time I should belt up. I don't think she put it quite like that. And I'm thinking, well, it's a fine thing. I accept an invitation to go to the Jaipur Literary Festival, and then I don't say anything. I mean, that's not fair, is it? You'd be cross. You expect me to make you cross, and I haven't made you anywhere near as cross as I expected you to be. So just get crosser, if you don't mind.
Come on, try harder. Are there any cross people in the audience? We have one here.
Yes. Oh, that one.
That's how cross she is.
In your views about Me Too.
Please start again.
I said I am not cross. I've studied Ms. Greer since college. But I am a little disappointed in your views about Me Too. Hollywood and what happened with Harvey Weinstein and the NDA might be a very small part, but growing up in this city 20, 25 years ago, we could not walk the streets without getting harassed and eve-teased. Eve-teased is a terrible word, but yes, that's what happened to us. Today, it has given us courage to stand up and look at each other and say Me Too. And I think that in itself is a huge leap. I don't think it's whining, ma'am. If you
yeah, but I'm certain I didn't say that.
No, I mean, when you say that, you know, Me Too is whining.
Well, she actually said that she didn't use the word whining, but you have been critical of it as a movement.
I'm critical of it as a movement because of its connection with civil suits. You know, you have a police force. The police force must investigate a crime as serious as rape is taken to be, free of charge to you. The only problem is that you are the complainant, but you will be treated as a piece of evidence. You will be examined, you will be tested, you will be further intruded upon. And in court, you will be torn to pieces, especially if the guy that you've fingered has got parents and relatives who will pay for a lawyer who will spend all their money defending him, when we know that if he says, I thought she consented, he is going to walk.
But that being true, it makes the movement even more courageous, because that's what you're up against.
Yeah, but you don't waste time and you don't waste money. We have to think of ways of keeping women safer. And simply saying that someone has spoken to you in a sexually suggestive manner. In fact, yesterday, it happened to me in my car, driver here, me in the back, no seatbelt, won't do up, that's fine. A beggar boy came running along the side of the car with tapping on the car, tapping, tapping, and I said no, and he made an obscene gesture to me with his mouth. And I was amazed. He must have been 9 at the max. And I thought, this boy dared to make his mouth into a vagina for my delectation. How mad. What's happened to everybody? Why has sexuality become this sink that it's being used in this way by everyone? How do we rescue it? You know, we rescued it in the past by extreme modesty, eyes cast down, pulling your veil over your face when your father-in-law came into the room or whatever. It was all to do with...
Not going out after 8, all of those things. But that's not a solution, and hence Me Too.
Except Me Too is not a solution either. Now, one of the things that makes life difficult for women is that we give birth to boys as well as girls. We worry about our boys. We worry about an accusation that they cannot defend themselves against. We worry at insane jail terms that are longer than you get for murder. I mean, whose moral system is this? We have to sort it out, but to sort it out, we have to talk together, and we have to talk for a long time, and we may still not get anywhere, because it's not the first time we've tried to do it. And India won't do it alone, especially when you have the British legal system choking an already highly circumscribed legal system. But it will not come from England. I think it's more likely to come from India than anywhere else. And you may think I really am crazy, but one reason I came to India in '71 was I was searching for the goddess. I thought, surely if you have a vision of God as female, you must have a different attitude to women. Now prove that to be true for me, please.
I read somewhere that you have a collection of some 40 images of the goddess Kali and representations in your home. Is that correct?
40?
Or has it grown since then?
No, I wish. It's not 40.
Ms. Greer, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we don't want to be goddesses. We want to be human. And we want to be treated as such. So this deity and this goddess, I have no inclination of being treated and put on a pedestal and then demanded a different morality. We want to be human. That is why the Me Too movement, that this is not okay. This is absolutely not okay to treat a woman as an object, either to be worshipped or to be slutted. I'm so sorry, I just wanted to...
Thanks very much.
Well, now here is my take on that. First of all, you are human, whatever it is. No one is calling you a goddess or saying you need to be one. It's, if you think there is nothing divine about women, they don't participate in the Godhead, then what do you really think they are? It makes it easier to reify them, to treat them as objects. That's simply the point there. I didn't want to make any greater point than that. We certainly don't want to be worshipped. What we want is something simpler, which we call respect. And it means don't take me for granted. But also, I mean, I have to say that when I had dreadful jobs, like I was a waitress, if it hadn't been for the messing about and the playing sex games and talking dirty, I don't think I could have stood it.
Oh, I loved being a waitress.
It was so boring.
Really?
Well, but...
I want to... we've got very little time, and I have a young friend here who has a question for you. Please.
Ma'am, what's your opinion regarding child discrimination? People said that we don't want girls, we only want boy child. Why is it so? What's your opinion regarding this?
You're asking me why people prefer boy children.
Yes, ma'am.
But you know the answer. And the answer in India is historic. Boy stays with the family. Boy brings earnings. Boy carries on family business.
Ma'am, but in these days, girls are the same now.
I think it's probably not the same in Jaipur, but I think you might find that in village India it is still the same, and that it's very difficult for families to get used to the idea. You know, dowry has been illegal in India. But dowry is still a cause why women are being killed, why women are being burned. You can't change people's mindset overnight. And if you make it too difficult for them, then you actually add to their misery and you add to the danger inherent in the situation. But in fact, India has done something. Now, I wrote a book after the Female Eunuch called Sex and Destiny, and that was about population politics and how population politics, as it was being enforced by the West, was getting birth control a bad name in India. I'm speaking about the emergency, about the forcible vasectomies carried out on men who were given transistor radios as a reward and all of that. And that book was about how people built families in India, what effort went into it, what care, and to treat it as something of no cultural importance was wrong. But in the meantime, since that book was published, and it was read in India more than anywhere else, you now have almost reached demographic transition. What that means is that birth rate is not increasing. This is extraordinary. This is wonderful. And it is the pledge of the future for India. And in that world, women will have a much wider selection of roles to play.
Thank you. Let there be more daughters like you. We have one last question, but it has to be really quick, because everyone's waving at me. Really, really quick. Whoever you are, talk quickly.
I would say thank you so much. This is my once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I love you. In a world full of writers like you, Sylvia Plath, Toni Morrison, Alice Walker, how do you see writers like Ted Hughes and Sigmund Freud?
Well,
in very few seconds.
I've been accused of misunderstanding Freud. I think that's probably true. I didn't really feel that I wanted to understand him terribly well. I quite like the idea that he has nothing to say of relevance to me. But there are feminists who would disagree with me. Did you say Ted Hughes? Ted Hughes, well, he's a good poet, and he's a good nature poet. But then I have to ask about Sylvia. I mean, when Sylvia met him, she bit him on the cheek. She was determined. No, why do, you could ask another question. Why do women poets want to marry other poets? That is a bad idea.
Don't marry poets. On that, we're going to have to leave it. I would like to say Germaine Greer switched on the light bulb for an entire generation. Thank you, Germaine Greer.
Once again, thank you to Germaine Greer and also to B. Rowlatt for moderating this session. The good news is there will be a book signing. The book signing area is located at the back of the Nexa front lawn, so please do go and buy copies of the books at Full Circle Bookstore, and both Germaine and B will be in the book signing area to sign for you. You could also take a burning question if you didn't get a chance to ask one during the session. You could take it there, and perhaps the authors will be kind enough to answer them for you. The book signing area, once again, is at the back of the Nexa front lawn. It's on your left-hand side, the left far corner. Books, unfortunately, are not on sale in the book signing tent. You have to go to Full Circle Bookstore first to purchase your books and then make your way to the book signing area. I will ask, as we're moving around, that you do not leave bags or belongings on seats.
They often ask
we
us,
obviously have a large crowd to accommodate. Please don't take up seats with your possessions and block them from other people.
We drive.
And the next session going in here in 10 minutes is Maharana Pratap, the Invincible Warrior. That is about the life and times of the greatest Rajput warrior with Rima Huja and Malashri Lal. That will start at 1:40.
Nexa. Create. Inspire.
Next.